What's up, everybody? You are watching Alabama football on YouTube. This is Alabama football recruiting. Joining us weekly, Trey Yanity, Andrew Bone, 18-year veteran in the industry, best-selling author. Guys, go find him on Twitter at Andrew J. Bone. Best in the industry, guys. Bringing you the first in coverage as it was this morning. Tyler Steen making a big announcement that he will be transferring to the Crimson Tide for this season. A lot of big news to get into this weekend. Of course, some big visitors. And today we're going to be focusing on the defensive backs. Last week, we talked about the linebackers. Today, we're going to really dive in on the defensive back group. So excited to get into it tonight. Before we do that, guys, hit the like button for me. Subscribe to the channel if you have not done so yet. And please get in the comments section tonight, guys. We want to hear what you think about Tyler Steen, about these defensive backs, and everything else that went on this weekend. And, of course, your thoughts on A-Day as well. But before we get into that, Bone, how's this last week been? How you doing?
Been good. It's been a good week. I mean, things are starting to pick up. Obviously, on the recruiting front, as it's been really for the last month, really ever since spring practice, got back into the swing of things, and kids have been jumping in and out of town over the course of the last few weeks. We got this A-Day game this weekend, so we're going to see a lot more kids, make their visits to Tuscaloosa, before the summer. Obviously, once we kind of get into the summer, things will really start to heat up. This spring's a little different because the last 2 years, coaches weren't able to go out on the road and evaluate kids and go to spring practices and stuff like that. We didn't see that the last 2 years because of COVID. Now it comes back, and it's going to be one of those situations where Alabama coaches are going to go really throughout the entire country. They know the guys that they're heavily recruiting right now, and the guys that they want, and obviously they're going to go see a lot of those top guys, but they're going to also go see a lot of those fringe guys, the guys that they want to see in camp, or they want to see at least in spring practice before they really give that go ahead, that green light to jump on board. So we're probably going to see a lot more offers that are going to come out over the course of the next month or so, especially with spring practice heating up for high schools throughout the country. We're going to see a lot more kids set up visits to Alabama for the summer months, and I think it's going to be another great summer. And I'm really looking forward to seeing some more commitments. Currently sitting with only 2 commitments in this Alabama recruiting class right now. So when's that next one going to jump on board? I wouldn't be surprised if we see some happen, either sometime this week or maybe after the weekend when Alabama has their spring game and a lot of top kids on campus.
Yeah, no doubt. Going to be a fun weekend overall. Some big ceremonies going down. And of course, the 8A game, a chance to see where Alabama football is in spring practice and the recruits as well, getting into town to check it all out. But we're going to talk about some recruits here in a little bit. I want to get to a guy that has already played college football for quite some time now, a guy that we have been tracking since he announced he would be in the transfer portal, Tyler Steen, making it official this morning. He will be transferring to Alabama. Now, you've had conversations with the family, and, this is a guy that Alabama really needed to have for a young offensive line. Just been dominating the transfer portal in general up to this point. But how big is it for Alabama to add to this line? What does it mean for this group in 2022?
Well, it's a great addition, and you can go back and watch our video breakdown of Tyler Steen on the Bama Insider channel. But just some quick hitters here. I mean, I had a chance to talk to his dad. This morning, talked to him last Friday night. Talked to him a bunch over the course of the last few days. Just about the decision and how they kind of knew once they visited Tuscaloosa a few weeks ago that was going to be the spot. He ended up taking a visit over to UCLA just because the UCLA coaches had really been coming after him, for a while, and really wanted him to take a visit. So he took that visit, came back, knew where he wanted to go. It was Alabama. Informed the Alabama coaching staff, informed all the other coaches of the schools that recruited him to let them know of his decision. So this has kind of been known for a little while. This wasn't a situation where everybody was waiting around trying to find out what he was going to do. We were. The reporters and fans were waiting to hear, but all the coaches, the people who really mattered in this whole decision-making process, they all knew. So nobody was really sitting around over the course of the last few days wondering what was going to happen with Steen. He already knew his decision, but this is certainly a guy that I feel like is going to come in, contribute right away. The one thing about Alabama, as we've seen over the last several years, is they're not going to go after somebody in the transfer portal who they believe is going to sit the bench. They recruited him, went after him for a reason. They believe that he's got a chance to contribute. He's been a 3-year starter on the offensive line at Vanderbilt. So he's got a lot of experience, and he's going to bring some veteran leadership to the locker room. Obviously, there's some great young talent there, and some guys that are probably itching to get on the field, some guys that are wanting to start. Whether that's an upperclassman or somebody who might be a freshman or sophomore. This brings in some more competition. I think he's got a good chance to start, but if he doesn't start, it's certainly going to benefit some of these other younger players that are certainly competing for a starting position. So I think this is a great pickup for Alabama. They've hit a home run on the other guys that they've added in the transfer portal. Not only this year, but in the last few years. And I think this is going to be another home run addition for the Alabama football team. And so he'll get there in late May after he graduates from Vanderbilt. So he's coming in as a graduate transfer, and I think he'll either play at that right tackle position or left tackle once he gets kind of settled in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, you love that versatility too. Has options, could play right or left tackle. And you just love the character of Tyler Steen. We've heard throughout this recruitment process about how much he loves that business school, how much he loves the academics at Alabama. So excited to see him get on campus and compete for one of those offensive line spots. Guys, drop a like for Tyler Steen. You're going to want to drop a like from Img Bryant as well, the number one outside linebacker in the country. I know he had a visit this past weekend in Tuscaloosa. I know you had the chance to talk to him as well. What were his thoughts, and how did this visit go?
Loved it. I mean, just loved every bit of that about the visit. And this was an important visit for him because he's going to be announcing his top 4 schools on May the 1st. Going to be announcing his college decision on July the 23rd. Now, Alabama has been one of his top 5 schools for a long time. This wasn't anything new, but this was his first trip to Alabama and getting a chance to see the Ties campus, getting a chance to sit down with the Alabama coaching staff and kind of figure out exactly where they see him fitting in the system and how they would like to use him. And really recruited more as an edge rusher. They like him at that jack linebacker position. He measured in about 6'2.5", 240 pounds during his visit to Alabama this past weekend. I know that the profile page there says 225, but he was 240 during the visit with the Tide, so a little bit bigger than that. But this is definitely a guy that I can see in Alabama's recruiting class. Alabama currently sitting at the number 1 spot for him, and we'll see who else makes that top 4 when he announces it here in a couple of weeks. But Alabama certainly in it. I believe Florida, Georgia, Miami, probably going to be the other schools in the mix for him. He'll take those official visits likely during the month of June, then make that decision the following month. But right now, really like Alabama's chances with Img Bryant after a great visit. But he came up to Tuscaloosa with his mom, his brother. Just really enjoyed seeing everything, sitting down with the coaching staff, sitting down with Coach Saban, also talking to some of his former teammates who played at Img Academy with him last season, including Tyler Booker and Jahai Campbell. So, got a chance to be around those guys. Really, liked hearing what he heard from them about Alabama, what it's like to be a student athlete there. And I think that Alabama's going to have a great chance to land him here in the next few months.
Really talented outside linebacker here. As you can see, number 20 player in the country there, the number 7 player rather in the state of Florida, out of Jones High School in Orlando. Big weekend to get Img Bryant in town, but I know we have a lot of big names coming into town this weekend for A-Day. Brandon Ennis, I saw on the sheet there, Richard Young as well. Talk about some of these other guys coming into town, what you expect out of these visits, and what we expect to see out of A-Day in general.
I think getting Richard Young back on campus is obviously huge for Alabama. This is a kid who visited for Junior Day back in January. He was in Tuscaloosa for a few days last summer. Has a really strong connection with Robert Gillespie, the running backs coach, and just really loves Alabama in general. Really has always told me last summer that it was his dream to play at the University of Alabama. Obviously, some other schools are certainly in it: Georgia, Ohio State, Florida. I think his decision ultimately comes down to Alabama and Florida. Even though Ohio State and Georgia are on his list, I know he likes Florida a lot. And I think if he ends up going out of state, I think Alabama has a great chance to land him. And I'd probably give Alabama the edge for Richard Young right now. So big visit for him this weekend, coming up again for an unofficial. As you mentioned, Brandon Ennis, the number 1 wide receiver in the country out of American heritage. He's going to be coming into town this weekend as well. This is his very first visit to Tuscaloosa. Alabama's been right at the top of his list really for about a year. He committed to Oklahoma in August, decommitted, but Alabama was always one of his top three schools. So he's finally making a trip to Tuscaloosa, getting a chance to see everything and be around some people that he knows pretty well. I think Earl Little Jr. plans on coming up to town this weekend. They played together this past football season in American Heritage, so definitely a big target. Another big-time wide receiver that's going to be making his way to Tuscaloosa this weekend is Jonte Cook out of the state of Texas, DeSoto High School in Texas. Visited Alabama last summer, has always expressed a lot of interest in Alabama. And most people kind of see him staying in the state of Texas. Texas has been really high on his list for a long time, but Alabama's going to have a chance to make a big impression once again with Jonte Cook. Walker Lyons, the number one tight end in the country, told us a few weeks ago that he plans on making a trip back to Alabama this weekend. And we haven't been able to confirm 100% if he still plans on coming back. But as of right now, we do expect Walker Lyons, the top tight end in the country, back in Tuscaloosa this weekend. We're going to see some in-state kids, obviously, back in town, some guys that could potentially make decisions. I would not be surprised if we see some commitments happen. You're always kind of on the lookout for a commitment or two during the 8A weekend. We've seen some big ones through the years, and without Alabama currently only sitting with 2 commitments, I'm sure they're a little eager to get some more guys on board. One guy in particular that I'm watching pretty closely this weekend is Jonze Pierre, outside linebacker from Eufaula High School in Alabama, one of the top in-state players, and definitely somebody that Alabama has been pushing for the last several months. He's 6'3", 225 pounds. Plays that outside linebacker position, can rush off the edge. Definitely somebody that I feel like is going to end up in Alabama's class. It's just a matter of when, not if. So keep an eye on Jonze Pierre this weekend. We're also going to be watching a couple offensive linemen that are expected in town, including Raqquez Mcelderry, who is currently committed to Georgia. Now, this is going to be Mcelderry's 3rd trip to Alabama since his commitment to Georgia. There's a lot of speculation that he could flip. Will it happen this weekend? We'll have to wait and see. Wilkin Formby, in-state offensive tackle, making another trip to Alabama this weekend. I think this is going to be his 3rd or 4th visit to Alabama, including 3 trips to Alabama during spring practice. So can Alabama potentially go ahead and get him on board? He's been taking some visits, enjoying the process this spring. Just came off visits to Auburn and to Tennessee. So maybe he might be ready to go ahead and jump on board. We'll have to wait and see if that's the case. And obviously, you're going to see a couple big names also in town. Peter Woods out of Thompson High School, going to be making his trip back. I think Tony Mitchell's also planning a return, also out of Thompson. So some big names that are highly rated, expected in Tuscaloosa this weekend in that 2023 recruiting class. Now, we're going to see some underclassmen also in town, including the number 1 cornerback in the 2024 recruiting class, number 2 overall player in the country, Desmond Ricks from Img Academy. So big visit for Desmond Ricks this weekend. He has a top 2 of Alabama and Florida State. So can Alabama create a little bit of separation this weekend for Ricks and getting that number 1 spot? I think they're going to have a good chance to do that.
Yeah, going to be a huge weekend overall. And you just love how much in-state talent there is right now. Going to see some of those guys this weekend. Of course, some big names coming from out of state as well. Really excited to jump into this defensive back group and kind of talk about the big board. But before we do that, a few other notes we got to touch on here. Carmelo English naming his top 5. Caden Proctor is going to has set a date for his official visit to Alabama. Austin Sierreveld named his top 3 as well. And out of Buford, Georgia, their big trio visited the Tide. Talk about some of these headlines and anything else you want to get into before we really dive in on this defensive back big board.
Yeah, a lot of news and nuggets kind of throughout the course of the last few days. We saw Carmelo English, who is a in-state wide receiver from Central High School in Phoenix City, announce his top 5. A couple of days ago, he actually announced it said that he was going to announce his top 7 in June, but decided to go ahead and release his top 5, as you see there with the graphic: Alabama, Auburn, Kentucky, Florida, and Penn State. Now, this is a kid who had a tremendous junior season, helped lead Central High School to the state championship game against Thompson. They ended up losing, but had a great overall season. He had over 1,000 yards receiving during his junior season, 18 touchdowns. This is a kid who keeps pretty quiet, doesn't really do a lot of interviews. Nobody really knows what's going on in his recruitment, but we do know one thing: Alabama is going after him. They're pushing for him. They really like him a lot. They would certainly take a commitment from him, but he keeps things pretty tight-lipped as far as who's in the lead. But it's kind of an interesting group of top schools. They're not necessarily the SEC schools, but you have those 4 SEC schools, and then you throw in Penn State, kind of a wild top 5 there to see. But Alabama, certainly a strong contender for him. Now, you mentioned Austin Sierreville, one of the top offensive linemen in the country out of Ohio, visited Tuscaloosa a few weeks ago. Then narrowed it down to a top 3 as Alabama, Ohio State, and Notre Dame. I don't think he's going to make a decision anytime soon. I think he's going to at least wait until he takes some summer visits. I certainly expect him back in Tuscaloosa at some point in the month of June. So we'll be watching for a visit date set up for Austin here in the next few weeks. Last week we saw some big names that visited Alabama's campus, including a trio from the state of Georgia, from Buford High School, King Joseph Edwards, KJ Bolden, and Edric Houston and Edwards, 2 of the top pass rushers in the entire country for 2024, and then KJ Bolden, who's one of the top athletes, can play wide receiver, can play safety, definitely somebody that any program in the country wants as a part of their team. But these 3 guys all visited Tuscaloosa last weekend. All 3 have very high interest in the Tide, continuing to build those relationships with the Alabama coaching staff. So, we're definitely keeping a close eye on those 3 guys. But once again, they're in the 2024 class. There's really no rush into making a decision. They're going to enjoy the recruiting process. They're taking a lot of visits. They're going to go see a lot of different schools during the summer, go to some games in the fall. Then once you kind of get into the spring of next year, then they start kind of narrowing it down. But Alabama has already offered all 3 of them. They want all 3 of them. They're going to recruit all 3 of them for a very long time, and they're going to be in the race for all 3 of them. And then finally, as you mentioned, Caden Proctor, 5-star offensive lineman, number 1 offensive tackle in the country. He's actually supposed to visit Alabama this past weekend. Something came up. He had to cancel it, but he has gone ahead and set up an official visit. So Caden Proctor, number 1 offensive tackle in the country, is going to be visiting Alabama on June the 10th for his official. Now, this is going to be his first visit to Alabama since last summer. It's been a couple of days in Tuscaloosa last June. So this is going to be obviously a very big visit for him. Definitely one of the top overall targets that Alabama is going after. Iowa is very high on his list. Been to Iowa several times. I think that's probably Alabama's strongest competition there. But we'll see how things go during the official here in the next couple months.
Yeah, going to be big to pull them away from the Hawkeyes there out of the state of Iowa. Going to be fun to track that. Another 5-star on the board there in Alabama's recruitment. Of course, at defensive back, they've already really done pretty well comparatively. And, you look at 2 of these guys, Jaleel Hurley now and Elliott Washington as well. Alabama's only 2 commitments so far in this 2023 class. Let's dive into it, Bo, and get into this big board for the defensive backs. Before we do that, guys, you need to hit the like button for me one more time. We're trying to get this show to 500 likes. Help us get out there in that algorithm and grow. But, we've already seen 2 guys commit with this class. Numbers-wise, what is Alabama looking to sign as far as defensive backs go? How many more do we see in this class?
Yeah, I think Alabama's, certainly looking at adding, 3-4 more defensive backs in this class. Yeah, I think we're going to see, 5 or 6 total overall. This is going to be, pretty interesting because there's a lot of guys who are out there, a lot of guys that we're going to talk about that have high interest in Alabama, that have Alabama as one of their top 2, top 3 schools. Some, may even have Alabama as their leader right now. So it comes down to, who's Alabama going to end up taking? Who, would they accept a commitment from right now? You got some guys coming on campus this weekend for visits. Would they go ahead and take their commitments if they were ready to go ahead and decide? So, yeah, I think we're looking at 5, 6 defensive backs in this recruiting class. So that means 3, 4 more spots. We're not going to see 7, 8 DBs in this class. That's just not going to happen. But you already have 2 really good ones, Elliott Washington, Jaleel Hurley. Jaleel recruited more as a cornerback, with Elliott Washington recruited more a little bit as a safety, can play that star position, nickel. So, definitely can move him around. But I think Hurley's a straight up corner, and Washington more in that safety role.
Yeah, I mean, you love the start, at least a defensive back there. Versatility with those guys, very talented players. But, you look in state here and talk about a couple of guys that Alabama's interested in. A.J. Harris and Tony Mitchell as well, a guy you mentioned a little bit earlier. It'd be big for Alabama to continue to make this in-state push here, dominate Thompson High School as well, along with it. But, do you see Alabama signing either of these guys? And, is there a chance they can sign both of them?
Yeah, I don't see them signing both of them. I think it's one or none, and I know that's probably tough for Alabama fans to hear, just because you got some really good in-state kids this year, especially at the defensive back position. You want to try to sign, every single player. It's just not going to happen. There's some great out-of-state players that Alabama certainly is in on, and we'll talk about those guys in a minute. But as far as in-state guys are concerned, AJ Harris has certainly been a top priority target for a lot of different schools. Alabama, it's been kind of weird. There hasn't been a tremendous amount of contact between both sides. Harris hasn't really visited Tuscaloosa much. He visited Alabama back in, I think it was September. That was his last trip to Tuscaloosa. And I really don't know if he's even going to plan on coming back to Alabama. Not necessarily from the state of Alabama. He's a military kid, so he moved to moved to Phoenix City just a couple years ago, but has had high interest in schools like Ohio State, Georgia, Florida. A lot of people think that Florida could be in the driver's seat for him right now, but I don't see him at Alabama at all. Now, in terms of Tony Mitchell, Mitchell has visited Alabama countless times, and I think it almost seems like he's looking for a reason to go elsewhere, because he's gone to Florida and named Florida as a favorite. He's gone to Texas A&M, named A&M as his favorite after this past weekend. We should see him back in Tuscaloosa this weekend for the A-Day game. And I do think that Alabama's going to be in it, for the long run with Tony Mitchell. What's going to be interesting is kind of seeing, who are some of these other defensive backs that are going to jump on board potentially before Tony Mitchell does, and does that affect his recruitment, in terms of him looking at Alabama, or maybe in terms of Alabama looking at him, just because of the overall number. So we'll have to wait and see kind of how all that unfolds. But as of right now, Tony Mitchell remains a top target for Alabama. They're continuing to recruit him. He's going to continue to visit, and I still think that Alabama is going to have a great chance in the end to land his signature.
Be another big Thompson athlete to get. And it is tough to hear, these in-state guys maybe showing interest elsewhere, but there's a lot of talent in this class around the country, in this position group, rather, around the country. So, you can't sign either of these guys. Not a big deal. You'd love to get Mitchell, though. So he has shown some interest. But, we've seen a lot of really big names visit Tuscaloosa throughout the spring. Cormani McClain, the top cornerback in the country. Caleb Downs, the top safety in the country as well, already visited. Where does Alabama stand in their recruitment? Which of these guys, if either, out of those two, do you see signing with the Crimson Tide?
I think they're going to have a strong chance to land either one of them, and potentially both. Both of them have high interest in Alabama. I do think with Cormani, it's going to end up coming down between Alabama and Florida. Florida is certainly putting the full court press on him, but he is also at the same time, developed a really strong bond with T-Row, Travaris Robinson, Alabama's cornerbacks coach. He really likes the fact that if he goes to Alabama, he's going to have a chance to work with Coach Saban every single day. Came off his trip to Tuscaloosa, last month, essentially with Alabama in the driver's seat, and then ended up visiting Florida. There's a lot of home state pressure on him to stay down there in Gainesville. So we'll have to kind of wait and see how it all shakes out with Cormani. But he's not, the good thing with him is he's not in a rush to make a decision. He's going to, be, very careful as to, what he says to the media. He's going to be careful in terms of, taking his visits and really kind of breaking things down and making sure that he's making the right decision. But I think this is an Alabama-Florida battle all the way. Now, with Caleb Downs, I do think this is another border war. I think it's Alabama and Georgia. Some other schools are certainly in it. He really likes, Clemson, likes Ohio State, thinking about taking a visit up to Notre Dame. But Alabama and Georgia, two definite schools. They're going to get officials. I think Florida might also get an official visit from him. But Alabama, Georgia, I think in the end, it's going to be one of those two schools. He's visited Alabama several times, visited Georgia several times. So this is going to be a really tight recruiting battle for Caleb Downs, and also for Cormani McClain for the next several months.
Yeah, it's always fun when you get these border battles. Alabama and Georgia constantly, battling for recruits, along with Florida as well. And going to be fun to kind of track these guys. But there are some offers out there, guys that have high interest in Alabama. We talk about cornerback out of the state of Texas, Malik Muhammad, cornerback out or defensive back, excuse me, out of Tallahassee, Makari Vickers, Bryce Thornton out of Alpharetta as well. Some guys that have really liked Alabama so far. They have offers out there. Where are these guys standing, in their recruitment at this point? And do you see all three signing on with the Crimson Tide?
I think Alabama's got a great chance with Malik Muhammad. It's a kid who has visited Alabama twice this year, including this past weekend. There's been high interest in him for a very long time. Got a great connection with the coaching staff, and he's also one of these kids that doesn't really talk a lot. Keeps things pretty tight-lipped. So we hadn't had a chance to talk to him since his visit to Alabama this past weekend. But we know that Alabama's a top contender. I say this past weekend, he was actually in town, I believe, on Wednesday or Thursday of last week. But I guess we could say last week, but he's certainly a guy that Alabama wants. He has high interest in Alabama. Just kind of have to wait and see what he ends up doing, and see if he's going to make a top 3, top 4, top 5 list, and then take official visits to those programs a little bit down the road. Now, Makari Vickers, I could easily see him joining Alabama's class sooner rather than later, especially with the DB numbers. You got 2 DB commitments already. Makari's visited Alabama several times. He was at Junior Day a couple months ago. He's coming back for the spring game this weekend. Really close friends with Alabama sophomore Terrion Arnold. 2 played together, and this is definitely a guy that has high interest in Alabama. Camped at Alabama last summer. Was in Tuscaloosa, I think, for 3 games during the regular season. So I think they're going to have a great chance to potentially get his commitment as early as this weekend. So we're certainly keeping an eye on Makari Vickers this weekend in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, just to add more guys to this DB class that already has 2 commitments would be awesome, especially this early still. April 16th is the date set for it. So it'd be great to get his commitment even that early. We talk about this weekend and some of the guys coming and, really focusing on this defensive back group. Any other names, maybe guys not going to be here this weekend, guys at Alabama are really focusing in on, to try to add to a group that's already looking pretty talented?
Yeah, and you mentioned Bryce Thornton a minute ago out of Milton High School in Alpharetta, Georgia. He's one of those kids that received an offer from Alabama. About a month, I guess last month in March when he visited for Junior Day. The Tide's really starting to make a big push for him. They like him a lot, more as a safety, but certainly somebody that they have a lot of interest in. But as far as who else is out there, I mean, there so many guys they're still evaluating, still going, wanting to bring in for camp or at least wanting to see during the spring. Now, Jonel Aguero, one of the top defensive backs in the country. Originally, he attended Img Academy last year. Now he's back home in Massachusetts. Definitely a guy that Alabama's been recruiting for a long time, and they would love to add him. Will he come back to Alabama for a visit over the course of the next? He says he was coming back for spring. I don't think he's coming back for the spring game this weekend, so that means he won't be back until June. But definitely somebody that that we're going to continue to keep an eye on, see what happens with him. But I think Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Florida. I mean, he really loves the SEC. He also has high interest in Ohio State, but I think this guy is an SEC guy. I think he's Alabama, Georgia, maybe LSU, but I think right now I'd probably give the edge to the Bulldogs just because he's visited Athens a little bit more than everyone else. So gotta have to follow the visit sometimes. But if he makes it back to Tuscaloosa, then I think Alabama's going to have a very realistic chance with him.
Excuse me, I might have been on mute there for a second, but another 4-star out of this class, another big guy, for Alabama to win between this Georgia-Alabama battle, like I said, that we see well too often. Bone, been great diving into this defensive back class tonight, really focusing in on some of these guys and talking about some of these visits and everything else going on right now. I know there's a lot going on in the world of recruiting this time of the year. Your closing thoughts as we kind of, wrap it up as a whole, what you're looking forward to the most this weekend and, anything else you got on this defensive back group?
Yeah, really just watching who else is going to show up for A-Day this weekend. Obviously, some big names are scheduled to make it. Are all these names going to end up making it to Tuscaloosa? Will we see potentially some commitments happen? I think we will. I think there's a really good chance that we're going to see one or two commitments over the course of the next week from the high school ranks. You never know what may happen in the portal. I think the portal's still open for business for Alabama after collecting Tyler Steen today. I think they're still keeping their eyes open, and I think there's still somebody in there that could potentially get added to the Alabama football roster. So, gonna be another busy week on Bama Insider. Another busy week for us, and certainly looking forward to it.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, last summer we saw Henry Toto, Jamison Williams both join the Tide in that period. So, hey, a lot can still break throughout this summer. And there's going to be a lot breaking this weekend, of course, guys. For the latest, go follow Andrew on Twitter at Andrew J. Bone. Be sure to follow Bama Insider on Twitter as well, just at Bama Insider. Before we get out of here, guys, hit that like button for me one more time and get in the comments section your thoughts on Tyler Steen, on some of these defensive backs, and, of course, everything you're excited about for A-Day as well. Until next week, guys, my name is Trey Yanity. For Andrew Bone, we thank you for joining us on this week of Alabama football recruiting. Have a great night, everybody. Roll Tide.